leave people alone. Let them be free. I mean, that's the way wealth is produced. It's not produced by politicians and their decrees.
O Brasil, em parceria com o Centro de Liberdade Econômica do Mackenzie, recebe para uma entrevista o professor Lawrence Reed, que é presidente da Foundation for Economic Education. Professor, thank you for being here with us. It's a pleasure and a privilege. And I would like to start talking about liberal economic and all the discussion about that. As you know, here in Brazil, we have a huge problem that is the inequality.
Yes.
In our society. How to deal with that, with this level of inequality that we have here in Brazil and the liberal thinking?
Well, there's more than one definition of equality. If you're talking about equality before the law, I think that's something that everybody should strive to achieve. That is, the law should be colorblind. It should judge your innocence or guilt of something you're accused of, irrespective of all those irrelevant factors. But economic equality is a very different thing. Each of us comes into this world a very unique person. We have different talents, we have different degrees of our willingness to work. Some people work harder, longer, smarter than others. We don't save at the same rate. Some people, if you gave them money, some would save it, some would spend it. So there are natural reasons why there should be economic inequality. It's a reflection of people being themselves. The kind of economic inequality that does concern me is the inequality that arises from people using their connections in government to get some special favors, advantages, protections, subsidies. You know, then inequality tends to be skewed toward the politically connected instead of what your talents and your abilities are. So I would get rid of the barriers that prevent people from progressing economically, but then don't expect them to generate the same incomes. We're different.
Do you think this is the Brazilian case? Because here we have a lot of privilege and subsidies and everything. Do you think this is an important route for the inequality in Brazil?
Oh, I'm sure it is. The more a society has gone down the path of subsidies, of favoritism, by government favors and so forth, the more you're going to have inequality. I would get rid of those kinds of subsidies and special favors, make the law neutral toward people, fair to all, and then celebrate the economic differences that arise from each of us being himself, his own entrepreneur, his own worker, whatever he chooses to be.
But this is a long process.
It is. It takes time, but anything worthwhile is going to take some time.
What can stimulate a choose like that, a changing like that? Do you think that the moment that Brazil is living now can give us the opportunity to deal with that?
Well, it's my understanding that Brazilians today are more open, more receptive to new ideas than perhaps they have been in a long time. Because you've gone through some political and economic turmoil, I think there may be more people than ever before looking for answers, looking for something new, something different, something that works. So I'm hopeful that Brazilians will realize that many of their problems have stemmed from too much government in the first place, too much in the way of political favoritism. And if they move toward a free economy, the differences in what we earn as free people will certainly still be there, but it'll be there because of fairness. It'll be there because of your talents, because of your abilities, not because of your political connections.
There's, along with that, the discussion about the capitalism itself and the inequality and the globalization. How do you put these other issues in facing the Brazilian challenges now?
Well, I think globalization has been, by and large, a very good thing. But that's not to say it hasn't been accompanied by some bad policies. Sometimes in a pursuit of globalization, governments have erected all kinds of special privileges that we've been talking about. Some people get them and other people don't. I favor a fair field and no favors. Allow people to trade as freely as possible across international boundaries. And that, in the long run, without political favoritism, without special deals that government gives to some and not others, but a truly free market, you can create prosperity for everybody over time instead of prosperity for few at the expense of others.
Which is the time that we can see efficiency or results after we choose a state that does no more privilege than we have today?
Well, if there are certain barriers that government has put in place that if you got rid of them, you would see almost instant progress. Brazil has some of the worst paperwork, bureaucratic requirements to start a business and to grow a business of any country in the world. If you get rid of as much of those as possible, you'll see a burst of entrepreneurship in fairly short order. Other things that government has done take time to remove, and the effects of their removal will take time to see. So this is both a short-term and long-term process. But Brazil can start now by cutting out so much bureaucracy, so much in the way of regulation and paperwork that strangles businesses before they ever get started.
You discuss a lot the differences between rights and privileges. We are now facing this question in Brazil.
Yes.
We have much more privileges than rights, but most people think that the privileges are rights.
Yeah.
So how to deal with that?
I think people need to reassess the distinction between privileges and rights. They're not the same thing. Rights are things that come with you by virtue of your birth. By being a sovereign, independent, unique individual, you come into this world with rights. Rights basically to live in peace, as long as you let others live in peace. A privilege is not a right. A privilege is something that can be a special favor just for you, maybe because of some political connection you've made. Politicians trying to keep you happy. It's not something they necessarily will give to anybody else. That's when the playing field becomes unlevel and unfair. So I'd say get away from privileges and embrace rights. Countries that have done that tend to do very well economically and by any other measure.
But here in Brazil, we have this problem, which is the state has an important and heavy issue and heavy role in defining what is right, what is a right, and what is a privilege.
Well, there's a mystique of the state in a lot of places. I would guess here in Brazil too, where you sort of assume that, oh, because it's the state, it's somehow noble, or they'll know how to do things, or they're right, or they're smarter than we are. But I think Brazil has been through some really horrific times recently that should make people understand that the state is nothing special about it. These are people who, like everyone else, are pursuing their own self-interest. And sometimes they do it in ways that are helpful to everybody, but quite often they do it in ways that are harmful to other people. So we need to discipline the state, downsize it, make it smaller, and make it more attentive to people, but otherwise leave people alone. Let them be free. I mean, that's the way wealth is produced. It's not produced by politicians and their decrees.
This is not a challenge exclusive for Brazil. We have this in Europe, in the US, the discussion about Brexit and everything.
Yes. Oh yeah, it's very common. This is a discussion we've been having really for a couple thousand years. But there are plenty of examples around the world of countries that have been in very bad shape and that have rebounded and become prosperous in short order because they relied upon freedom and free markets. I'm thinking Germany after World War II. It had just gone through a decade and a half of socialism. After the war, it was divided, occupied, demoralized, defeated, devastated. But a man named Ludwig Erhard rose to be the economics minister. And overnight, he said, I'm cutting tariffs, I'm cutting taxes, we're cutting spending, we're getting rid of bureaucracy and paperwork. We're going to unleash the German economy. And within 10 years, a defeated Germany became the most important economic power in Europe. That's the lesson, that's the model that Brazil should be looking to.
I'd like to bring for this conversation communication. We are on the fake news time. Mm-hmm. Me, for instance, and all the journalists, we're facing this challenge to try to tell the truth and to seem truthfully, especially about economy. Here in Brazil, we have this issue about the pension reform. Yeah. We still need to convince people that there's a deficit in our pension system. How to deal with that? Because even if we try to tell about the difference between rights and privileges,
Yes.
people don't trust us.
Well, I think with regard to pension reform, which is an issue in many, many countries, it's not unique to Brazil. What you've had is governments that have tried to please people today by giving them lavish, expensive pensions without concern for how that's going to be funded in the future. So it ultimately comes down to the next generation has to pick up the bill somehow. So maybe we can get people focused on that if we say, look, it's not the adult thing to do to say, I just want whatever I can get now, and my kids and my grandkids will figure out how to pay for it. That's not a sign of character. It's not a sign of responsibility. It's not what adult people should do. So think about your kids. Think about your grandkids. Do you want them to start out in life with a massive debt for pensions that could not be afforded, that would be gone by that point, except they have to pay the bill? I think people need to wake up and act as adults everywhere, not just here in Brazil.
Yeah, I said about the pension reform issue, but this is a discussion all over the world. We have
Yes.
now the US and the Russia thing and everything. How to deal with that? Because the fake news is there.
Yeah, it's a constant struggle, no question, because people are absorbed by the present. They tend to think, right now, what strikes the eye, maybe another week, but they don't necessarily think about the next generation. But we have to get people to understand that's what good, responsible adults do. They think about the next generation.
Do you think people are willing to listen to that?
Well, I keep trying. There is no other solution. To the extent that we focus only on now and only on ourselves, we're just putting our children and grandchildren in a terrible situation later. The reason we have problems today that we're dealing with is because somebody in the not too distant past wasn't thinking of us. Surely we don't want to leave that kind of legacy to our kids.
Do you think the liberal thinking is threatened by something, by the protectionism discussion or all this radicalism that is taking order in
Oh
the
yes,
world?
but this is nothing new too, because we've always, for hundreds of years, been fighting the desire on the part of some people to get some special protection, some special favor, some subsidy for themselves at the expense of everybody else. The problem we've always faced is to convince as many people as we can that that isn't the way to go, that the more you focus on just a few goodies for a handful of people, the more you jeopardize the economic health of society at large. So try to think bigger picture, longer term. Think of all people, not just a few, and then you'll have a chance to shape public policy in the right direction.
This is a discussion that you're dealing in the US now.
Yes.
And what about Europe with the Brexit, and even here in Brazil, dealing with Latin America?
It's a never-ending and universal issue to get people to understand that sound policy requires that we look at the long run and all people, not just the short run and a few people. That's an age-old struggle. It's nothing new. But generally speaking, the countries where people understand this and are thinking long-term, sacrificing for today if need be in order to have a better future, those countries tend to do better than the ones who say, forget the future, let's just live it up for today. That's not sustainable. You can't live like that for very long.
Talking about Brazil and in Latin America, do you still believe that Brazil has an important and leader role of the region?
By virtue of its size, I don't see how the rest of Latin America can ignore what happens in Brazil. Brazil has an opportunity as the biggest country in South America to really set the stage for the whole continent. It has an opportunity to be a model that hopefully other countries will follow. Look at what's happening in countries like Venezuela these days and others that have gone a far more radically socialist direction. They're all disasters. Brazil has an opportune moment right now to say, we're going to learn from that. And we're going to adopt the only model that ever has really worked in the world, and that is of freedom and free markets. We can be a shining example not only for Latin America, but for the rest of the world. About
the rest of the world, people are not paying attention on us anymore.
Well, they should. This is a big country. It has a lot to say. What happens here can have an impact far beyond your borders. I think you might be surprised how many people are watching what's happening here. And political developments of the past year and a half have caught the attention of a lot of people in America, I know. So we hope that Brazilians will get it right, maybe be a good example for us too, because we need to learn some lessons again in America as well.
Again, talking about Brazil, we're facing this huge problem, which is the corruption that we discovered, very huge systems and everything. How to discuss the fight against corruption, and bring the economic thinking, the liberal economic thinking together?
Well, we have to get people to understand the connection between corruption and big government. The bigger that government is, the more it takes, the more it spends, the more favors it passes out, the more responsibilities it takes away from you and tries to do itself, the greater the opportunity for corruption. There is no way you can have both big government and good government. The bigger it gets, the badder it's going to be, because people then will fall over themselves trying to get in charge of this massive apparatus of control and regulation and redistribution, and that inevitably leads to corruption. So if you want less corruption, you have to do more than prosecute the corrupt people. You've got to shrink government so that good people are not so easily corrupted, and the bad people don't have the incentive to run and be in government.
We are going to a place that the government itself or the state is going to be smaller, not just because we are choosing that, but
yes.
The state is broke in Brazil. It's the same opportunity to face this discussion about the size of the government.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. This is the time. I think you've got an opportunity
Not because we chose, but because it happened.
You have no choice now. Yeah, you've gone so far down the wrong path. You've got debts that are too huge to handle. There is little choice but to reform in the direction of freer markets and less government. That's nothing to feel bad about. That's something to rejoice in, because that's the path that can take Brazil to a new level of prosperity.
You seem like an optimist, professor in economics. It's time to be optimistic about the future?
Absolutely. I'm an eternal optimist. And I believe that you have to be optimistic for a couple of reasons. If you're not optimistic, if you think the future is lost, that you can't make a difference, that you're not going to win, then two things happen. One, you don't work as hard for what you know to be right, because pessimism is kind of self-fulfilling. You kind of give up, so that just assures the bad things are going to happen. But then also, you're not going to persuade other people to join your cause. If you tell them, join my cause, but we're going to lose, they say, well, why bother? So you have to be optimistic. And the fact is that history has shown time and again that a people who are excited about the future, recognize they can make a difference, that what they personally do and how they live their lives can reshape the world. Anything's possible. Don't give up.
Which is your great enemy today for this thinking?
Well, since we just talked about optimism, I'd have to say pessimism is the greatest enemy. It really is, because people who have given up,
Do you feel the world is more pessimist than 10 years ago?
In certain places. It's hard to measure worldwide.
In the U.S., for example?
Right now, I think there's more optimism than there was as recently as a year or two ago. People are feeling a little bit better about the future, but there are a lot of bad trends too. But I keep telling people, no matter what the trends are, no matter how bad things may look at any given moment, it's optimism that will give you the encouragement to solve those problems. How are you going to solve a problem if you think you've been beaten right from the start? So nobody knows the future. No point in being pessimistic until you get there. And so if you work hard as an optimist to change the world, you'll have a far better chance of achieving that than if you're pessimistic.
For what you know about Brazil, do you think it's time for us to be optimistic about the future?
Yes, I think Brazilians today should be optimistic, not only about their future, but they should be optimistic about what they can do as free people in an entrepreneurial environment of freedom and free markets. Brazilians are inherently an entrepreneurial people. And I think if you just liberate them from all the pure paperwork and bureaucracy and controls and high taxes that have stifled this economy, you'll be amazed at how quickly they'll rebound. So I'm very optimistic.
Thank you very much. I hope your message get there,
Okay.
get out there.
Thank you, Thais.
Thank you.